exactly sure what I wanted to do with this lecture. There's a lot of things that we have kind of heard the stories of ad nauseam. We've heard about the meaning of the 12 days of Christmas. We've heard about kind of what a Christmas tree is, a Christmas tree is. There's things we kind of know a lot about. So I wanted to try to find some things maybe we didn't know as much about, and to look at some of those things, and then also to look at how Christmas is celebrated and thought about and how they do worship in some other countries, especially some countries where you wouldn't even think that they're having Christmas services, okay? So we're going to kind of go through that tonight. So every place that you look has some tradition. A lot of stuff is very similar. You're going to see a lot of stuff that just looks like our Christmas, okay? Of course, especially Europe, because that's where most of our traditions come from for our Christmas. But everywhere has sort of some little quirks and some little things that are specific to where they are. And I was thinking about that and thinking about Christmas traditions that families have. Like my family has a tradition, I couldn't find it, but we have a little box that we give gifts in. And this little box, on the cover of the box, it's kind of an old, it looks like maybe an 1800 sort of artist drawing. And it's a picture of Santa Claus coming down the chimney, and then there's a little kid with a pistol just pointing it at Santa Claus, and it's the strangest thing I've ever seen. But our little tradition is every year someone gets the box, and everyone is so excited when they get the box. So I know we all have similar traditions, but do any of you guys have a tradition really odd, like the box, or something that maybe only your family does?
Well, we have rice pudding with an almond in it, and the person that gets the almond gets a gift. And I, being the cook, am the only one I'm the one that puts the almond in.
Puts the almond in.
Because I can't let anybody cheat.
How many years in a row have you gotten the almond?
I've never gotten some. Oh, I do have. Lots of cheaters. One year, some kid stuck 3 in there just to be funny. Oh, I knew where I put it.
Anyone else have an odd tradition? If you don't, you should start an odd tradition that's just your family's. Yes?
Well, since Christmas is my birthday, we have birthday cake for dessert after Christmas dinner.
I love that.
Oh, that's awesome. That's nice. I like it. That's a good
Our
tradition.
dessert on Christmas is a birthday cake for Jesus, and we always sing happy birthday to him. Always, we've done that for years.
See, I've never sung happy birthday to Jesus.
We always do.
You will this year.
You're going to be that little kid with the pistol. So I want to the first thing I'm going to do is have a little bit of fun, and we're going to have a little quiz about Christmas around the world. The game should be good. In China, what do people traditionally use to light their homes at Christmas time? Torches, candles, fairy lights, which I'm not even sure what a fairy light would be, or a paper lantern. Right, that was pretty easy. Paper lanterns. So, in China, there's not a huge number of Christians in China, partially because of when the communists came in, they really frowned on religion. Now, I say there's only a few, about 2% of the population of China, but of course, that's 31 million people in China, right? But they some organizations say there's more, but we can say about 31 million. They decorate their homes, interesting, with some evergreens, and a lot of the same decorations that we use. They put up a Christmas tree, they call it the tree of light, okay? And they cut out these little red lanterns and they decorate with that. You know, a lot of the traditions that we see around the world are secular in nature, okay? And we see it in the United States. And people tend to bemoan the secularity, the secular nature of Christmas. And it can get way out of hand. But if we recognize that the reason we have all of those traditions traditions is because we're celebrating the birth of Christ, then we need to, we can appreciate those traditions as long as we stay focused on the reason for those traditions. So it's really up to us. You can embrace those secular traditions because they're fun. Santa Claus is fun. Frosty the Snowman is fun. Rudolph is fun. But we've got to remember what that's pointing to and the reason for that. So as God's children, we've always got to remember that those secular expressions, the only reason they're there is because we're celebrating the birthday of Christ. So off of my little stand there. And this is a short little clip of Christmas in China.
Christmas Mass is the most popular service in this 300-year-old church. Deng Ti and her son are third and fourth generation Catholics. Though they no longer live in this neighborhood, they make it a point to come back here on this special day.
24号这一天，就像昨天。
We usually fast on Christmas Eve, and then after midnight we all get together. The whole family has a big meal to celebrate the birth of Jesus.
Christianity may not be the dominant religion in this mostly atheist country, but it is the fastest growing.
It's not just Christians who come to church. Christmas attracts the non-believers too, who treat the day as a festival, an opportunity to experience something different, and a chance to come and take pictures of the decorations.
Among the younger Chinese, attending midnight mass is seen as the trendy thing to do. The service has become so popular that the church has to give out tickets a week in advance. Many of the faithful prefer the day service, a quieter time for prayer and celebration. For many Christians, however, it's also
Imagine that, having to give out tickets a week in advance just so you can get in to the Christmas Eve service. So, as I said earlier, let's take a look. On what day do the Belgians have their primary gift giving? November 29th, November 26th, December 6th, or December 9th? December 6th? That's exactly right. They do it on December 6th. So, like I said earlier, a lot of the things that they do in Europe are very similar to the things that we do, or I guess that's actually vice versa. In Belgium, they have two Christmas figures, right? We've got Santa Claus. They've got St. Nicholas and Santa Claus. They've got two different folks. And so St. Nicholas Day is celebrated on December 6th. So it's actually set apart from the celebration of the birth of Christ. They have their secular celebration, St. Nicholas Day, Santa Claus, St. Nick come, and they have the gifts. And then 19, 20 days later, they celebrate the birth of Christ, which I thought was actually really cool because it does sort of separate those two. Who do the Czechoslovakian people traditionally set a place for at the table for Christmas? King Wenceslas, the Christ child, St. Nicholas, or Santa Claus? The Christ child. They set a place for the Christ child. And here, the main celebrations take place on Christmas Eve. That's their big day. A lot of people fast, and one of the reasons that they fast is there's a tradition that if they fast all day, they will see a vision of the golden pig. And if they see the golden pig, that means they'll have good luck all year. And again, this dinner is eaten on Christmas Eve. What do you guys have for Christmas Eve dinner usually? Tamales? Chinese food?
Oyster stew.
What?
Oyster stew.
Nice, oyster stew. We've gone to Paisanos. I'm usually here. So, in Czechoslovakia, they have a delicious carp soup and potato salad to celebrate Christmas. What? Carp soup? Carpy. All right. Where are the Danish children encouraged to believe that Santa's elves live under the floorboards, in the garden shed, in the attic, or up in the chimney. In the attic they live in, which to me is terrifying, right? To think about little elves living up in your attic would absolutely be terrifying. But the reason the elves live in the attic is because the kids have advent calendars. And so they don't get all their gifts on Christmas Eve or all their gifts on Christmas Day. They get a gift, one gift for 24 days. Okay? And so you'd have to have elves living in the attic to deliver a gift every day. Otherwise, it would just be impossible. So this is kind of where, and it's become a tradition in the States, of the elf on the shelf. We've seen people with the elf on the shelf. A lot of kids have them, moms and dads have them. There's hysterical stuff online that people have set up the elf on the shelf doing different things. But that's kind of where this comes, this idea that there's an elf living there in your house to be bringing you gifts throughout the season. 1st through 24th. So, what are the French said to place on the fireplace on Christmas Eve to receive gifts? Small sacks, stockings, socks, or shoes? It's shoes. They put shoes up there. And I really couldn't find any good reason for shoes on the fireplace, except maybe if their shoes are cold or their shoes are wet, it's a good place for them to warm up and dry up. Kind of like the tradition we have in stockings. That's the idea behind stockings. So in France, Christmas is called Noel. And my French is absolutely terrible, so I'm going to butcher this. But the phrase is bonnes nouvelles, right? Is that Frenchish? Bonne nouvelle, yeah. That sounds like everything sounds Spanish. But that means the good news, right? And so that's what they're sharing with each other. It's, Merry Christmas. No, they're saying, hey, this is the good news. We're celebrating the good news of the birth of the Christ child. In France, a lot of people will put a log in their fireplace and they'll burn it from Christmas Eve until New Year's Day. Okay, that's the Yule log. We hear about the Yule log. They burn that log, and it stems from an old tradition that the farmers would use a part of that log at the end of the time and put it out in their field to ensure good luck for the harvest for next year. So they leave their shoes to be filled in the fireplace with gifts from Pierre Noel, okay? Papa Good News, or Mr. Good News. But they find, sweets and fruits and nuts and small toys. And sometimes they'll be hung on the tree as well. Who is traditionally said to deliver the presents in Russia? The Kremlin? Yeah. Father Time, the Snow Granddad, Mr. Frosty, or Grandfather Frost? Grandfather Frost, exactly. So, in 1917, the Bolshevik Revolution spread throughout Russia, and the Russian Christmas traditions were banished. Okay? Grandfather Frost, or Ded Moroz, was banished into exile. You couldn't have that as part of your Christmas celebration. So the reason being is that this fellow was considered sort of a children's god. Okay? And because he was considered a god under communist rule, no religion. Right? And so it was impermissible. But 20 years later, about 1937, Grandfather Frost started showing up again. He starts showing up again. And Christmas Christmas celebrations became more and more public. People started to express their faith. And it's always surprising to me, and I've talked about this with a couple of folks, that it seems that where the gospel is suppressed, where Christianity is suppressed, it thrives. It grows. And I've always found that to be amazing. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. But even after it's been banned to practice any religion, just 20 years later, the traditions start coming back. 2 generations later, they start coming back. In the Netherlands, what transport does St. Nicholas traditionally use? A horse, a reindeer, a Santa bus. It's not Santa bus, by the way. A husky-drawn sled. A sled drawn by a husky.
Reindeer.
No, that was someone asked what kind of sled. That's not the answer.
I know that.
It's a horse.
A horse. A horse? So, again, this is a celebration that occurs on the 6th of December. This idea of Santa Claus happens early in the month, so it's separated from Christian. And it's the annual giving of gifts in the northern part of the Netherlands. And on the morning of the 6th, St. Nicholas Day happens. So they have a special day set aside for St. Nicholas. It happens in the Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg, northern France as well. And so what it's called is Sinterklaas. Sinterklaas. Santa Claus, right? Sinterklaas. And it's the primary source, this is where we get Santa Claus from, is right here in this part of the world. And again, I like this because the secular tradition is set apart from the sacred tradition. It's 2 different and distinct holidays. Which country claims that the first nativity scene was demonstrated therein? France, Italy, Australia, or Spain? Italy. Italy? That's right. It's Italy. And so the person who they say did it first, who's credited with this, is St. Francis of Assisi. And St. Francis' reason for doing this was that trying to put the emphasis back to the birth of Christ. So even back in 1200s, this had become an issue. Secular things had started to weave their way into the Christmas celebration. And so St. Francis said, you know what, let's do something. I'm going to set up this nativity scene to remind folks, hey, this is why we're here. It's not about eating too much and giving gifts and all of that. It's about this. It's about the birth of Christ. One of the things that it's important to remember, when we think of, when Paul went out into the world, when he spoke with Jewish people, he spoke to Jewish people as Jews. When he spoke to the Romans, he spoke to the Romans in a way a Roman person would speak. When he spoke to the Greeks, he would speak to them as a Greek person would speak. Now, the Christmas tree, a lot of our Christmas traditions come from traditions from other religions that were there being practiced before Christianity comes into a country. So the church did the same thing. They took these things that the people were doing to worship different gods and to worship different things and brought them in to Christian faith. If you're worshiping a tree for whichever god, they said, well, you can use that tree and remember our God. Remember the God of Moses, the God of Abraham. And so, in a way, the church did the same thing that Paul did, is they went out and they spoke to people in languages that they can understand. And this goes back to kind of the point I'm making all night, that as Christians, we need to start to take these secular traditions and claim them. People are doing them everywhere in the world. Let's put some meaning to those traditions that people are doing, and then that's a way, that's an entrance to sharing the gospel with folks. So which country has a version of Santa called Tomte that the children see or understand, to be a scary little gnome? Africa, Switzerland, Sweden, or Spain? Sweden? That's right, it's Sweden. So, did it what? Sweet, listen. Spelling is not my strong suit. I don't know what to tell you. I don't know why spell check didn't catch it for me. So, a Tomte is this little mythical creature from Nordic folklore. And it's really typically associated with the winter solstice and the Christmas season. And this is what's terrifying to me, is it's thought to be like a little goblin-like fella, about 35 inches tall, or about 3 feet tall, with a long white beard, wearing a little pointed cap. And the kids are terrified of this thing. So it kind of looks like a little evil garden gnome. Now, that being said, everyone in Sweden, as I spelled it, knows about this fellow. It's one of the most popular creatures in Scandinavian folklore. And so, with the romanticization of the folklore of the 19th century, this little fella, this Tomte, gained greater and greater popularity and began to weave its way into the Christmas tradition. It began to weave its way into all of these different traditions. So,
Paul, in Norway, they have about 10 trolls.
Yes.
oh, do they?
Christmas, yeah, and each one is a different,
We were in Austria one year. We had just got married in 1990, and so I was 23 and my bride was 22, and we were in Austria because her dad had frequent flyer miles, and so we went to Austria, and so it's right after Thanksgiving, and the Christmas markets have started to open up. It's a beautiful time to be in Austria. But we're walking around the street one night late after dinner, and we're walking down the street, and all of a sudden a group of people starts running the other way from us. And we're just, what's going on? And then I see in the distance this shadowy figure about 7 foot tall with these devil horns and this cape and this really creepy outfit. And he comes up and we're just, what is happening? And he sort of has us cornered in this doorway, and he takes out like this horsehair whip. And he's not like, but he's like, kind of beating us with it, and then walks away. And we have no idea what's going on. And so that is the tradition of Krampus. Have you all heard of Krampus? So Krampus is like Santa for the bad kids, right? So if you're a bad kid, Krampus comes to visit you and leaves you rocks and coal and stuff like that. But if you're a good kid, Santa comes to visit you. We asked the guy at the hotel about it. Now, if you're expecting Krampus, it's awesome. If you're not, it's terrifying. So what is the traditional Japanese Christmas dinner? Sushi, udon noodle soup, fish and rice, or Kentucky Fried Chicken? What? Fish and rice? Udon?
No.
It's Kentucky Fried Chicken. Check out this video. So this is in Tokyo. There's lines around the block to pick up chicken. And all these people that are in line, they've actually ordered ahead to get their chicken. You have to order weeks ahead to pick up the buckets, all made up, ready. What she's saying is that I never eat fried chicken, but on Christmas Day, you eat fried chicken. Okay, so yeah. We're going to talk about it. Well, it's one of those things that's interesting. Because a tradition has to start somewhere, right? So, it's eaten on Christmas Day. And it all started back in 1974. It's not thousands of years old. But KFC started a campaign called Kentucky for Christmas. And if you want to get into a really strange YouTube loop, start looking up Japanese Kentucky Fried Chicken Christmas advertisements. And there's ad after ad after ad. And it was so popular that that's what people throughout Japan eat for Christmas. It's amazing to me, with all the delicious food that the Japanese have. I guess when you live in Japan, it's just food. But with all the amazing food the Japanese have, that fried chicken, specifically Kentucky Fried Chicken, is the traditional Japanese Christmas dinner. And
Are there many Christians in Japan?
there's not. Christianity in Japan is, it's an interesting thing, because Japan is a very strange place. Japan, when you think about Japanese religion, you think about Shintoism, right? And you think about Buddhism as Japanese religions. But they imagine that there's about about 500,000 Christians in Japan. But Japan is a remarkably secular nation, more so than anywhere else you can imagine. It's really interesting, because when you go to the Shinto shrines and you go to the Buddhist temples in Japan, you'll see people there, and they have these fountains, and you wash your hands, and you go up and there's incense, and so you see people doing these things. And one of our guides in Japan said, none of these people are practicing the Shinto religion. The Japanese, the main thing the Japanese are an incredibly polite people, okay? And so for the Japanese, they go to a Shinto shrine and they wash the hands and they do the incense and they do the things, because that's what you do when you're at a Shinto shrine. And then they'll go down the road to the Buddhist temple and they'll do the things you do at the Buddhist temple. Not out of any religious conviction, but just because this is the proper thing to do at a Buddhist temple, right? So, it's
told us in China that the people were superstitious, and so then they would go to each of the temples and all the different gods and worship them, just for good luck.
Just in case, yeah. Just in case, that's interesting. And it's really only been, Christmas has really only been celebrated for the last few decades. I'm guessing, since they realized how good Kentucky Fried Chicken was. Now, in Japan, Christmas is known really just kind of as a celebration and a time off to just have some happy times and to spread some joy with your family and stuff. And in fact, Christmas Eve resembles more closely Valentine's Day than Christmas Eve does. So Christmas Eve is a time where folks will get a date, or you'll go out with your girlfriend or your wife and you'll walk around in the lights, and you might make a reservation for dinner somewhere and share a meal. So it's really more like Valentine's Day. Now, The big cities, especially in Japan, are known for their lights. Oh, I forgot to mention this. The other thing they have at their meals is strawberry cake. It's a white cake with white icing and strawberries on it. The reason I put this little picture up here is if you have a phone and you open it up and you go to the emojis, the little slice of cake on the emojis, that's why that's there. Because it's Japanese Christmas cake. And that's specifically what that little emoji is Japanese Christmas cake. But, so, when you go to Japan, this is actually, this summer in Japan, outside the Robot restaurant, and you can see, and this is just a little alleyway, but the lights in Japan are ridiculous at night. I mean, it's unbelievable. And so, I'm going to show you a couple of pictures of their Christmas lights. And this is what you go out on a date on Christmas Eve and walk around. These are, Calvin, you gotta get busy. This is one of the sets of lights. And you see all the people lined up there. I like this one just because it's got Zoe hugging a Christmas tree. But these, I mean, these light displays are just stunning. Look at that. There's Mount Fuji. And so, yeah, I just was amazed at the lights in Japan for Christmas. So you can see everyone's kind of coupled up and they're walking around enjoying the evening on Christmas Eve. So, it's not a national holiday, but a lot of schools are closed at Christmas time in Japan. Really for the New Year's break. And they treat Christmas Day, that's just business. That's another day to be at work. So, in the Gospel of Mark, chapter 16, verse 14, it says, "Afterward he appeared to the 11 themselves as they sat at table. And he upbraided them for their unbelief and hardness of heart, because they had not believed those who had saw him after he had risen. And he said to them, Go out to all the world and preach the gospel to the whole creation." And you know, it's interesting because as we look out in the world, we look at these different expressions of Christmas and these different celebrations that people are doing. That's exactly what happened. That's exactly what happened, is Christianity has spread out in the world. Even in Japan, whether they know it or not, it's had some effect on their culture. It's had some effect on what they do and the way they live their lives. So, again, as we were working on this, we were in staff meeting, and Dave's assistant, Nathaniel, we were talking about, he said it might be interesting to look at a couple of places that we don't really even think about the celebration of Christmas. So, the first place I'm going to look at is Christmas, I'm going to go back, Christmas in India. Now, India is a nation of 1 billion people, and there's lots and lots and lots of religious celebrations going on in India because of the hundreds and thousands of gods of the Hindu religion. Again, it's about 2.3% of the population that are Christians in India. That being said, there's 25 million people that are Christians in India. One of the largest is in Mumbai, which actually used to be Bombay, is what Mumbai is, or was. And they're known, mainly in Mumbai, they're Roman Catholics. In the smallest state of India, Goa, which is in the west of India, it's about 26%. About a quarter of the people in Goa are Christians. Many of the folks in Mumbai come from Goa, and they share their faith, and that has begun to grow there in Mumbai. So in India, midnight mass is very important, and the families will walk together to the mass, and they'll they'll sing carols, and then they'll have a big feast of food. And then and again, some of these traditions are so Western, and there's the giving and the receiving of gifts. They decorate with poinsettias and candles for this service. So you see the star lanterns that you see in India, and so the other big thing in India are nativity scenes. How many of you got nativity scenes at your house? Right, we've all got nativity scenes. When I've traveled, I'll pick one up. I've got one from Mexico where the characters are just teeny tiny. I've got a bunch of them. But in India, they love nativity scenes. They're crazy about nativity scenes. St. Francis would be really, really happy about the nativity scenes in India. So let's take a look at some of these. They're just remarkable. Look at this. I mean, they made a little river and these little separate land areas, and they put these fences up, and it's all part of a nativity scene. And these are in people's houses, in their yards, outside their churches. Look at this thing. It's hard to see, but it's 3 stories tall, right over here. And again, it's a huge scene with the stars and other buildings in Bethlehem in the background. I like that one.
Are these miniatures or are they life-size?
These are miniature, but when you talk about miniature, it's like sometimes you see people with a railroad or something like that, and they've got these massive setups. So they're small, yet enormous. You know, they're small and big at the same time. Here's another one. All the little pebbles, all the little rocks that have been put out. And so it's kind of, I think in one sense, it's kind of like, and it happens from time to time, you drive down a street as Thanksgiving ends and Christmas season kind of starts, and you'll see like one house starts to put lights up. And then a couple of days, someone else puts some lights up. And then there's that jerk that lives like 4 houses down and it's lights everywhere. And then the whole street starts lighting up because people are like, well, he's got lights up, I gotta get my lights up. And I think that's a lot of what's happened with these nativity scenes in India. People started making them, and they're like, did you see that, guys? He had water. And so they make them, and they get more and more and more complex as they go. I mean, that's a big nativity scene right there that these guys have put together.
So even if people are not Christian, do they flock to these scenes just to see them?
I'm sure they do. I mean, as they're coming down the street, they're seeing them. But for the Christians, it's really kind of it's an act of worship, and it's part of their celebration of the birth of Christ. I think that's my last one. Yeah. So, they do have Santa Claus. He's known as Christmas Baba, and he brings presents on a horse-drawn cart, is what Christmas Baba rides. Now on Sunday, I was speaking to, who was I speaking to? I forget. Oh, it was Jeff. It was Jeff, and we were talking about what I'm thinking about for this presentation, and one of the things that I wanted to look at was the idea of how do they celebrate Christmas in countries that we wouldn't even think about. Christmas in Iran, all right? You think, well, that's a Muslim country. There wouldn't be any Christmas being celebrated there, but what you realize when you start to look at it is the history of Christianity in Iran goes way, 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 way back, way before even the Muslim faith. It's always been a minority religion, especially after the Muslim conquest. In the past, it had a lot more people that were Christians than it does today. But the Christians in Iran have played a really important part in the history of Christianity. They estimate that there's about 350,000 active Christians who are willing to admit to being Christians in Iran. Now, most of these churches are represented by really minority ethnic groups. The Armenians and the Syrians have always had their own language and culture, and they're the ones that are really fostering Christianity there. As newer, smaller churches start to grow, they're coming out of these other communities of faith, coming out of these Armenian groups and these Assyrian groups. So it's known as, in Iran, Christmas is known as the Little Feast, okay? And for the first 25 days of December, they observe a fast, okay? For 25 days. No meat, no eggs, no milk, no cheese, none of that. 25 days of that. And so for them, it's a time of meditation. It's a time of Advent where they're thinking about the coming of Christ and preparing themselves for that, for meditation and for prayer. And when the fast is over, at Christmas Eve, it's the last day of the fast, they go to worship and they celebrate, and the fast ends and they have a great, great feast. And they come to Mass and they receive communion, and after that, they're blessed. And it's interesting, here's some pictures, because it's growing in Iran. And so these are markets on the street where there's Christmas trees and Christmas decorations that are being sold because of this growing population of Christians in Iran. And so there's a dish to eat. Their dish is called harasa, and it's a stew that lasts several days. It's meat and rice. So let's take a look. This is a worship service in Iran.
Christians in Iran celebrate Christmas Day. Christians in Iran believe the new year brings new possibilities, hope for new beginnings, and an end to the previous year or past misfortunes. Many Christians in Iran are buying presents and ready to celebrate Christmas. Over 150,000 Christians live in Iran, and most of them are Armenians, which celebrate Christmas with friends and family members in churches throughout the country. We got a chance to visit Tehran's Sarkis Cathedral, an Armenian apostolic cathedral and prelacy, to experience their celebrations.
For Christmas, we always gather together with friends and family to celebrate. Especially on Christmas Eve, we stay up past midnight and pray. The next day, we go to church, light a candle, make our resolutions, and welcome the new year.
Christmas is the annual commemoration of the birth of Jesus Christ and a widely observed holiday, celebrated generally on December 25th by millions around the world.
Armenians consider 2014 to be the year of success. Every year we gather together at Sarkis Cathedral and pray and celebrate Christmas Day. One of our religious traditions is that in Christmas we don't eat meat, only fish and vegetables.
The original date of the celebration in Eastern Christianity was January 6th, which is still the date the Armenian Apostolic Church celebrates Christmas Day. Under Iran's constitution, Christians, Jews, Zoroastrians are recognized as religious minorities, have representatives in Iran's parliament, and are allowed to carry out their religious rituals.
In churches throughout Iran, several activities are held for Christians during this festive holiday season. Although Christmas and the New Year is a time usually enjoyed by children, many Christians believe it is also a joyous time for adults as they try to form their New Year's resolution to become kinder, more forgiving, and remember the goodness innate within all people. Reporting for Press TV, I'm Hossein Iskandar from the Sarkis Cathedral in Tehran.
So that's kind of what a Christmas worship service looks like in Iran. It looks very similar to our Christmas service. My robe's not that nice, but it looks very similar kind of to what we do for Christmas. And so again, it's inspiring to see our brothers and sisters in Christ continuing to worship in a country where they're considered a religious minority, and it's not as easy as it is here to be a Christian if they continue. And one of our lecturers was talking to us about this. The faith is growing and spreading in Iran and in Iraq. And it's because of these folks sharing their faith and being willing to talk about it and to worship that faith is growing throughout the Middle East. Finally, I want to look at Christmas in Iraq, okay? And this is, I find this maybe the most interesting of all. It's considered, again, to be one of the oldest Christian communities in the world in Iraq. In Iraq, Christians in 2003, it's estimated there were about 1,500,000 Christians in Iraq. That's a little over 6% of the population. Now, it's thought that it's dropped down to about 500,000 at this point in time. But again, it's hard to know because there's really not an official census, and you could be in danger of saying, I'm a Christian. So it could be as high, again, as 1 million. So somewhere in between there. Christmas Eve in Iraq. So Christian families celebrate Christmas, and one of the children in the family selected to read the Nativity story out of an Aramaic Bible. The rest of the families hold candles, and so these are some of the traditions they do, much better than the box tradition, I assure you. They light, while they're reading, they light a pile of dried thorns that's out in the corner of their courtyard, and once the story is read, they wait until this pile of thorns is burnt up. And while the fire burns, they read, they sing psalms, and they pray, and if the thorns burn down to ash, that's considered a good omen. That's considered a time that your year is going to be good. You're going to have good fortune for the next year. After it's all burnt out, they assemble and they jump on top of the ashes 3 times together. That's their tradition. Another bonfire is built in the church, and the faithful men of God gather and they chant together while the fire burns. And a bishop who leads the church officials carries out a statue of the baby Jesus throughout the church. The service always ends with the blessing of a bishop. Everyone comes forward to receive a blessing. And once that blessing is received, they call it the touch of peace. Then the service concludes. Gifts are a part of the tradition, just like in most places. If a visitor comes, it's the Middle Eastern tradition. They're invited in as family and treated as a very special guest for Christmas. So, all that being said, over the past few years, as we know, the Christians in Iraq have been facing incredible persecution from ISIS, right? That country has been torn apart. Now, things are getting better, but it's still really difficult for our brothers and our sisters in Iraq. So as we go into this season, think about those folks and keep them in your prayers, because they're wanting to celebrate the birth of Christ just the way we are, but it's much more of a struggle for them. And I found this clip that's actually a clip of a church in Iraq, and these people, ISIS had taken over their church and were using it as a battleground. And for 2 years, they've been unable to come and worship at their church. And after 2 years, they're living in another town. They get buses together, and they get soldiers to come, and they go and they have this worship service in their church. It's pretty cool.
Under heavy protection, Iraqi Christians celebrate what they call the Christmas miracle. For many, it's close to a miracle that they can return to their church in the town of Baghdad. This is the first Christmas ceremony here for 2.5 years.
This is important to us. We are scared of ISIL, but we are happy that we can do our religious service.
For 2.5 years, ISIL controlled this mainly Christian town, forcing thousands to flee to displaced camps. Iraqi forces recaptured Bartella only 2 months ago.
Christians are delighted to be back here to celebrate Christmas Eve, but this is far from a return to normal life. There are hundreds of soldiers in this church alone protecting the congregation, and it's a sign of just how precarious the situation is for Christians here in northern Iraq.
Beyond the church, buildings and homes are destroyed or booby-trapped with explosives, left behind by ISIL. No one lives in this ghost town. The congregation arrived by bus under heavy protection. In the distance, you can hear the occasional explosion as the Iraqi army and ISIL battle for the city of Mosul. ISIL ended up controlling many majority Christian villages when it took over large parts of northern Iraq. Christians, a religious minority in Iraq, fled, fearing mass murder by ISIL zealots. In this church in the town of Karamalesh, ISIL turned the church's garden into a fortified fighting position.
This was a sniper's nest, a shooting point, and it was from here ISIL fighters shot at the advancing Iraqi army.
At the Catholic church here in Karamalesh, young Christians decorate the Christmas tree. For them, it's an act of defiance, looking to brighten the shadows left by ISIL.
We put this green color into the life, to the hope.
This experience of fleeing their homes and living in camps for the displaced has been traumatic for the Christians.
No justice here in Iraq for the Christian. Many groups fighting between them. We are the victim of this fighting here in Iraq. So we need to be protected by the international community.
Christians can't return home because these towns don't even have the basic services of water and electricity. So they continue living in displaced people's camps, or the lucky ones with relatives. Back at the church service, Christians consider their future as a minority in Iraq. By some estimates, there were 1.5 million Iraqi Christians in 2003. Now media reports say less than a third remain. Those who stayed are wondering if it's not time to join the others.
Christians are worried. We can only come here for 2 hours with the army, otherwise we couldn't come. Maybe half of us are thinking of moving abroad.
They waited 2.5 years for their first Christmas back at the church. Now, some may decide that this could be their last Christmas in Iraq. Toby News, CCTV, Bartella, Iraq.
So I'm amazed at the dedication of these folks. There's fighting going on in the distance, but they've gathered to celebrate Christmas. And I know you might look outside Sunday morning, it's raining, and it's cold, and it's just nice to stay home, right? But think about these folks. Think about these folks who are traveling and risking death just because they want to get together as a community of faith and celebrate Christmas. And again, throughout history, the most difficult of circumstances, in Iraq, in Iran, we see Christianity continuing to thrive and beginning to grow again. And here, it's easy. It's easy to be a Christian here in the United States. And so this year, I'm challenging myself as I celebrate Christmas this year, and I eat too much, and I hope that I get that stupid box, and I decorate the house. As we do all of these things, let's just take a little time and remember and pray for these folks. Pray for our brothers and sisters around the world who are struggling to celebrate this holiday, but are excited to celebrate the holiday because they know the importance. They know the importance of Christ coming into this world. And they want to share that with each other and sharing that with them. And so even in the Christmas trees and the Santas and the Frosties and all of that other nonsense, let those things refocus us on the importance of Christmas in our lives. All right, friends, let's have a word of prayer this evening. Heavenly Father, we offer our thanks to you to gather together and to look at the different ways that the birth of your Son, Jesus Christ, is celebrated around the world. Dear Lord, as we busy our lives with the activities and the shopping and the packing and all the stuff that comes with this season, we lift up our prayers for believers throughout the world. Prayers to those who are struggling to celebrate. Prayers for those who are risking their lives to celebrate. May we be inspired this season by them, and may we be filled with the true meaning of the season. The light has come into the world. The darkness shall not overcome it. Amen. All right, gang. Thanks for coming tonight. If you have any questions, I'm sure Dave can answer all your Christmas around the world.
Yes.
Yes, I've got it done.